Well, I'm going to be getting up from here in a little while because I've got some images on my laptop that I'm going to show. But I started out sort of figuring out what I should do for this discussion, which I really didn't know I was going to be a part of. So I saw my name on the brochure. Well, maybe I ought to come down there. I ought to do something. But one of the things I thought about is the way in which conventionally we think of Sun Ra as this kind of unusual phenomenon in the history of outrageous sort of self-identification in a way. But what I wanted to try to do is to put Sun Ra in a much larger context, because I think what Sun Ra really represents, I mean, as strange as a lot of people thought he was, and as strange as what I think a lot of people thought the orchestra was, that he was actually part of a longer tradition of what in Black culture would be seen as kind of liberation philosophy. I mean, the notion of freedom as a determining impulse in the behavior and performance of Black people has been long-standing. And for people who were here earlier, who heard some of what Cheryl was reading in some writings, I mean, you can see echoes of this sort of liberation philosophy that come from way back. And so I thought I would start with a reading from David Walker's Appeal. I don't know how many people are familiar with David Walker. David Walker was a free Black man, lived in the United States in the 19th century. This appeal he wrote was published in 1826. I think, to be more accurate, to 1829, with David Walker's Appeal. Well, and the full title is David Walker's Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, but in particular, and very expressly to those of the United States of America. And the interesting thing about this and David Walker was that it was sort of written in part as a tool to incite insurrection, you might say, amongst Black people in America. Now, this is all well in advance of the Civil War, but he wrote this appeal actually sometime shortly after the ratification of the Declaration of Independence. So it was about 50 years, 60 years after. Actually, not quite 50 years after the Declaration of Independence. And it includes a critique of Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence that he found in Congress, and the kind of hypocrisy of the document as it sort of talks so eloquently about freedom and equality, but instead was rendered sort of under the hand of people who were themselves own slaves. But the other thing I think was interesting about David Walker's Appeal is and it's broken down into a series of chapters, the chapter headings I'll give you. But I want to read a section from it, which I think also kind of reflects on the way this Egyptian mythology and kind of Egyptian symbolism is kind of recurring theme. You see it in Sun Ra, and then sort of it carries on even before then. But the amazing thing about David Walker was that he had an incredible sort of, had done an incredible reading and study of history. And because historically, Black people sort of see themselves in some way related to the great traditions of history and antiquity in Egypt. And there's a segment in David Walker's Appeal that I want to read right now that sort of illuminates some of that. And then I'll proceed from David Walker to the way in which manifestation of these same sort of liberation philosophies extend through ideas of Afrocentricity as they come down to us today. And then end with the current manifestation, and this is the magazine that's, this is the April of 2006 issue of New African magazine, in which the question of who were these Egyptians, is still in play for a lot of people. Because for most Black people, the notion that somehow because Egypt was a highly developed civilization that it could not have been or never was a Black civilization is still an issue that's very relevant and under discussion. But let me read this one little section from David Walker first, and then I'll maybe read a couple sections from Civilization and Barbarism, or Barbarism by Diop, a little bit from Afrocentricity, which is primary text by the left-hand side. And then we see how the sort of reflection sort of occurs again in the ISIS papers by Francis Grace. Well, so anyway, we'll go through some of that, and then I'll go to my pictures. But anyway, this was interesting. You can see what like black men writing in 1829. I was stunned, to be honest. When we take a retrospective view of the arts and sciences, the wise legislators, the pyramids, and other magnificent buildings, the turning of the channel of the River Nile by the sons of Africa or of Ham, among whom learning originated and was carried into Greece, where it was improved upon and refined, thence among the Romans and all over the then enlightened parts of the world, and it has been enlightening the dark and benighted minds of men from then down to this day. I say when I view retrospectively, the renown of that once mighty people, the children of our great progenitor, I am indeed cheered. Yea, further, when I view that mighty son of Africa, Hannibal, one of the greatest generals of antiquity, who defeated and cut off so many thousands of the white Romans or murderers, and who carried his victorious arms to the very gate of Rome. And I give it as my candid opinion that had Carthage been well united and had given him good support, he would have carried that cruel and barbarous city by storm. But they were disunited, as the colored people are now in the United States of America. The reason our natural enemies aren't able to keep their feet on our throats. And this sort of notion of this sort of black unity, which is at the heart of Afrocentricity. It began much earlier than I think most people would give it credit for. And the fact that black people sort of see themselves as related in some ways to Egyptians, with Egypt being essentially the civilization of antiquity from which whatever strengths and unity the black population of the world has gained its force is really interesting. I'm going to read a little bit from Afrocentricity, and a little bit from, maybe I'll do this from the first, but it's also one of the ways we just talk about whether Egyptians were black or not. And it's in this chapter, latest discoveries on the origin of Egyptian civilization, the beginning of the anteriority of Nubian civilization. And he says, we have written in nations and in our later publications that according to the quasi-unanimous testimony of the ancients, Nubian civilization preceded and might even have given birth to that of Egypt. This is quite logical if one considers the likelihood that the Nile Valley was peopled by progressive descent of the black peoples from the region of the Great Lakes, the cradle of Homo sapiens. But conclusive archaeological facts that demonstrate this hypothesis were missing. The gap, it seems, has been filled thanks to the excavations of key steel at the University of Chicago, conducted at the Coastal Cemetery in Nubia under the auspices of UNESCO's international campaign in 1963 and 64 before the construction of the Aswan Dam and flooding of the region by filling the reservoir. The cemetery in question is a Group 8, a Nubian culture contemporaneous with the recent pre-dynastic period. It was called Cemetery L23 and L24. Special form contained very rich material now conserved at the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. So that's from day out. So